Hey guys, it's Lacy with an ADD Woman podcast. And today we're going to talk about ADHD and rejection sensitivity dysphoria. What is it? How to deal with it? How to recognize it? And maybe where it comes from? Welcome to an ADD Woman podcast. I'm your host, Lacy, writer of all things about ADHD parenting and being an ADHD mother on Mothering the Storm with Lacy Estelle at lacyestelle.com. Here on an ADD Woman podcast, we're going to switch it up and talk about all things to do with ADHD as an adult woman and how we deal with it. Now you might be thinking, ADHD, women don't really have that. Actually, we do. We've all just been doing such a great job for years of masking it. So let's dive in. So you may have heard the term RSD thrown around ADHD, and maybe you didn't know what it is. It's called Rejection Sensitivity Dysphoria. And Psychology Today says that people with rejection sensitivity dysphoria have an emotional reaction to negative judgments, exclusion, or criticism beyond what most people feel. So with that said, generally it is a heightened emotional reaction to perceived or real rejection. Now, I don't think that it's something that we grow up having. I think this is something that we learn, but I also think that it affects women more often than it affects men with ADHD. There has been a lot of studies overseas done more recently to look at the emotional aspect of ADHD that really plagues women more than it does men. I definitely think that rejection sensitivity dysphoria is right in there. Now, you won't find RSD or any variation of it in the DSM-5. It is not considered a diagnosis. It is more considered a symptom of ADHD that some people have and some people don't. So they also kind of will consider ODD or oppositional defiant disorder is a secondary diagnosis that they'll give kids sometimes who present with ADHD, who also present with opposition to authority and struggle to listen to directions and all those kinds of things. But I will tell you, I think all of those things, and this is just my theory, and as you know, I'm not a doctor. Kind of wish I was, but I'm not. That all of these things are really just talking about the same thing and giving it different names. How do they say that? A horse of a different color is still a horse, right? So it's all still the same thing, but everybody kind of wants to label it something different. I think it all comes back to all of these things have to do with the mood aspect of ADHD. Now, my doctor just told me the other day, I was in there talking to him and I was talking to him about birth control because I said, I can't do birth control. It affects my ADHD too much. And he's like, it affects your ADHD? And I said, yeah. I said, it makes my moods just all over the place. He's like, well, the ADHD doesn't affect your mood. I said, yes, it does. And he was like, well, but the stimulants that we give for ADHD, they don't play on your mood. I said, they affect my ability to control my mood. And he kind of looked for a second at me and then he was like, okay, I could see how that would be a thing. And I'm like, yeah. See, when you're a man, and probably especially when you're a man without ADHD. Now, I'm not a man, so I have no real idea. But my guess is the men have the forethought that we as women sometimes don't have in our emotional distress, right? So when men get emotional about something, it's why you don't see men cry all the time or cry as easily as women do, right? Because, we see something emotional and it just comes up in our feelings. It comes up in our emotions and we can't always suppress it down and we can't always control it. We don't always get forethought when it comes to our emotions. Whereas I feel like, men, I've been told before that men's brains are like boxes. If they take something out, they're opening one box and looking inside what's in there, rather than like women who have like a, rubber band ball of different thoughts all over the place that are constantly going. So like if a man is going to put away a thought, he's closing that box, putting it aside and opening a different box, right? And with that, I think, is if he opens a box of emotion, he opens that box, but when he's ready to close it, he can close it. Now, as a woman, that's not how emotion works for us. And as a woman with ADHD who struggles with executive function, now you might find a neurotypical woman can hold on for a second, maybe she's grieving or something, and she can pause for a moment and run to the bathroom or whatever and cry there, right? But when you have ADHD, it's that momentary pause that you need, that you lack to be able to stop what you're doing and say, okay, I don't want to fall apart here in the middle of a work meeting just because I've been criticized by my boss in front of everybody. But sometimes we don't have that. And I think that all comes down to our lack of executive functioning chemicals, to where the part of our brain that controls our behavior doesn't allow us to really grip a hold of that. But we can practice, okay? We can practice and we can work on it. So one of the biggest things I would say with rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a lot of it comes out in conflicts. So one thing that I will say I used to do is, like, when I had a boss and I had a day job, I had a job at one point for about 5 years where it was just me and my boss. And me and my boss were the only ones in the office. And if he wasn't there, it was only me. So I had nobody else to answer to except for him. So sometimes if I made mistakes, he was the only one that caught them. Sometimes he would come into the office and he'd be irritable, crabby, angry, whatever. Well, before I recognized my ADHD and before I got it treated, I used to just always be like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Did I make him mad? What did I do wrong? I must have done something wrong. So I think that's all part of rejection sensitivity, because it's a perceived rejection, right? I'm assuming I must have done something wrong. And where does that come from? Well, I think that comes from, as an ADHD person growing up in our lives, we so often were, dealing with always feeling like we're forgetting something, always feeling like we're falling behind, always feeling like, and because 9 times out of 10 we were, and not to our own fault, like we didn't want to forget the things that were important, but it would just happen, right? I'll get to that in a second. But a lot of times we will take this on, these small moments of what feels like rejection, right? And we'll take it on and we internalize it. And then we do something I call mortalizing it, which means that we take it and we assume the pain of it, even if it's not even a real pain. Now, sometimes there are instances when it is real rejection and it hurts even worse. So sometimes I think in kids and sometimes adults, you'll also see this come out when help is offered. If I offer help to my 13-year-old, sometimes he will be like, no, I've got it, I'm fine. And I think that's all because in his mind, he's worried he doesn't have something, and that if he asks for help or if he needs help, well, then he has to reject the idea that he is capable of doing something on his own. Again, that comes back to that feeling of rejection and not feeling adequate enough with ourselves. So when this sort of stuff occurs, okay, there's ways to overcome it. And I work one-on-one with women that I mentor in these aspects, because I think rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or just the emotional aspect of ADHD that goes overlooked in women, affects our relationships wildly. I think it affects our relationships to an extreme. So with that aspect in mind, anytime that you experience some sort of rejection, it's really important to just do a couple of things. It's helpful to ask yourself questions. Is it real? Why does it feel so bad? Is it because I was already feeling inadequate in this situation? Or is it because of something outside of myself I can't control? Now, I recently had a client that our relationship seemed kind of rocky. And even though I knew I was capable of giving her everything she needed, there was just a matter of the timing that we got together that just didn't seem to jive very well. And it seemed to be, unfortunately for me, that I continued to just disappoint her. And I told her that I had everything in the bag, that I knew what I was doing. And I totally did. But I will say I did burn myself out in trying to make her happy. And in the end, she still let me go. Now, that sort of rejection was really painful because I felt like I had done everything I could to make her happy with my services. And in the end, she still wasn't happy. But what we will do sometimes as ADHD people is we'll get stuck on situations like this. So I can get stuck one of two ways. I can dissect the situation for way too long and ask myself too many questions about where I went wrong, where she went wrong, or sometimes we do the opposite, which is not healthy, and we get defensive about it. And we just want to point fingers and say, well, clearly she had too high of expectations of me. Or, well, you know what? Here's the thing. She never asked me to stay up until midnight to get her stuff done. She never asked me to, work my butt off, to bend over backwards, to set aside other clients' work just to work on hers. She didn't ask me to do that. So me feeling frustrated and resentful was a product of my lack of boundaries. But at the same time, the rejection that I felt from still not satisfying her, that was real. She did reject me. She did reject my work. What can I do about that? I think the only thing we can really do about anything when it comes to rejection is to recenter ourselves and realign ourselves with who we are in Christ and who we are to God. And that might be the most important thing that you can do when it comes to how you're feeling. Feelings were never meant to be number one. They weren't. They were always meant to be controlled. Do you ever just wish someone could make decisions for you so you didn't have to worry about the effort of making decisions? Maybe you question if you'll ever get your life together or if you'll ever decide what you want to be when you grow up, and you're just feeling lost. Listen, whether you're a woman with diagnosed ADHD, a woman who suspects she may have ADHD, or just a woman who recognizes herself in the struggles I share on this podcast, I want to help. Through my mentorship, I want you to learn to trust yourself again by helping you discern God's desires for your life. How will we do that? By going back to the basics of being a Christian woman, what the gospel means for each of us, and how to apply it to our lives daily. But Lacy, how will that help my ADHD? Because once you have a good foundational understanding of who you are and what your value is, where it comes from and why, you'll then be able to figure out the next right step in your path to coping with your ADHD struggles. Whether that be practical ways of organizing your efforts, seeking therapy, continued coaching by me, or a formal diagnosis and medical intervention, it all begins at the source of all life, Jesus Christ. And you're probably thinking, okay, Lacy, but why are you doing this? And on top of that, why should we decide to work with you? Because I've been where you've been. Some days, I still know what it's like to ask myself questions like, am I really worth this? Can I really talk about this? Can I actually make a difference? And I'm here to tell you the answer is yes. And the answer is also yes to those questions for you. Yes, you can find a life you enjoy and feel comfortable with. And yes, you can find ways to manage your time, your life, your projects, your relationships, and your career. And yes, you can love Jesus while doing all of this. This mentorship will be slightly different than my regular one-on-ones. It will be group sessions monthly with a one-on-one with each and every member every 3 months for the first year instead of every month. But if you need more, you can ask for more, and I will be there. This isn't about me building a business or trying to gain a following. This is about you and your needs and the things you message me asking about. I want to help you build you. You can find the link in the bottom. Don't miss out. I cannot wait to see you there. So a lot of times when it comes to dealing with rejection as an ADHDer, I think in our lives, we tend to err on the side of no one else has anything going on. And so for the first way, I would say in suggestions on how to help cope with this, there's definitely a part of our brains, and this may be for everybody. I don't know, because I've only ever had ADHD my entire life, right? So I think that there's definitely something to be said for out of sight, out of mind when it comes to other people's environments and other people's circumstances. So back to where I was talking about my boss, and when my boss would come in and he'd be all angry and upset and irritated, or he'd be, he'd isolate himself, and I always just assumed he had to be angry or mad at me. I never stopped for a second to think, maybe he had an argument with his wife. Maybe he's frustrated about a client. Maybe there could be any number of things. I mean, he could have been upset that, he was running late this morning, for all I know. I always projected it onto me. And I think it comes from a place that, we spent most of our lives, most of our childhood feeling constantly like we're forgetting something, right? And so in our childhood, it was often that when we did forget something, we were disappointing someone. So, your mom reminded you to let the dogs out, but you forgot, and now the dog peed on the carpet right after your mom took you over to a friend's house, so you're not there. She calls you, she's upset, she criticizes you for forgetting, and because it's something that she directly asked you to do, you feel guilty, and you also feel bad because now your mom is the one paying the consequences for your forgetfulness, right? So you mortalize it, and by that I mean you take it upon yourself to feel pain for this circumstance, right? You don't want to forget something. So we make it way more painful than we need to because we feel really bad about it. We can't take it back. And there's really nothing we could have done differently because we just simply forgot, because our ADHD brains are just not hardwired to remember things in the moment, right? So we mortalize this, and then it turns into pain. And pain is something I think us as ADHD people, we utilize pain in a way to help us try to remember things. And it manifests itself into our adulthood as seeing criticism as painful, right? So even though there are times when criticism will probably not bother you very much, but there are other times where people closest to you in your lives, there's been times where my father, who is a really wonderful man, will sometimes just say something to me in a way that he assumes, he's talking to another adult and no big deal. And he'll just be like, oh, yeah, well, I just kind of figured that's just how you are. Or, he'll say something to me specific in pertaining to my character as a person and that he's never really liked that part of me or something along those lines. And that never really gets easier, right? It never gets, and you never get to a point where you're just like, oh, whatever. I don't care what anybody thinks, because ultimately we have to care what other people think. If we were to go through our whole lives and say, I don't care what anybody thinks of me, and I don't care about what, my closest people think of me. I don't care what anybody thinks of me. Well, then you have a whole different problem on your hands, right? Because if you don't care at all what other people think of you or how other people perceive you even, or at least how they know your character, the evidence of your character, and the Bible says the evidence of the Spirit of God, having the Spirit of God, the evidence of being a Christian is the fruit of the Spirit, which is, self-control, gratitude, patience, kindness. All those things come from, having the Holy Spirit within you. And those are the evidences we have of other people when we are looking for reasons to think, okay, this person cares about me, right? Because they show me in this way. Now, just as, certain things are not mutually exclusive, and I agree too that feeling rejection intensely from someone or from anyone does not mean that you are faltering or that you are broken or that there's something inherently wrong with you because one person or many people reject you. It all comes down to the fact that sometimes, like I said with my client, you just don't click with everyone. And on some level, you have to learn to be okay with that. There's a book I'm reading right now called Spiritual Depression by Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. It's an excellent book. But what he talks about in it is that our feelings were never meant to be first place. It was never meant to be that we were ruled by our feelings. That's why it always baffles me when so many people talk about, oh, well, I just want you to be happy. If you're happy, that's all that matters. Well, but that's not all that matters. It's not. If you're happy because you're causing somebody else pain, that's not true happiness, right? That's not real joy. That's not love and kindness. That is painful for somebody else, right? So rejection is it's a feeling. And if we sit with it for too long, we dwell on things that we really shouldn't dwell on. We can't change who we are. We can't change when we're not going to work well with somebody else. We can't change when we're bound to disappoint someone. In the instance that I talked about earlier with my client, it was definitely something where I started to realize, I felt and I realized and I had an intuition that I was bound to disappoint her because of the fact that we just did not mesh well. And it was nothing she did. And from my perspective, it was nothing I did. So here's the next thing that I'll come to when it comes to rejection sensitivity dysphoria and dealing with it. Part of it will make you pick apart every scenario. What did I do? Could I have done something differently? Did I make a mistake? Did I screw something up? Now, it's good to do this, but it's not good to ruminate on this because ultimately you can't go back. Once the rejection has happened, a lot of times the door is closing for either that relationship or that opportunity or anything along those lines. That door is closing, right? So the only thing you can do is either apply yourself in your next opportunity for it, whether that be, say it's a job application and you really wanted that job. If, you have to go back and apply for that job again when it gets posted again and you try something differently, you can do that. But the only thing that really truly helps you in this scenario is to take from the situation what you can learn from it. What can you garner from it? So for me, it was, okay, I don't think I set very clear boundaries in that contract that I had with that client. And that is something that I need to get better about. I need to get better about clearly defining my scope of work and her scope of work. That way, when we work together, she knows what to expect of me rather than me not clearly defining that role and having different expectations than what I'm setting for myself, right? So in everything, you can take from the rejection and you can say, okay, this sucks, this feeling sucks, but it doesn't actually equate to who I am as a person or to my value or to my worth, right? Because it doesn't, because that's the truth. The truth is being rejected by anybody, especially if you're a Christian. Okay, Jesus said they will hate you because they hated me first. And he has overcome the world. We are not of this world. So there's going to be times where sometimes you're just rejected because you're just rejected. Because you're a Christian, maybe because you have the Holy Spirit. Maybe you're questioning your beliefs and you don't know if you want to stay a Christian or if you don't believe in Christianity. And you start to see that there's this group of people that will accept you, right? But they do want for you to let go of your Christian beliefs. Well, let me just tell you, that should be a red flag to you. Because based on the Bible, people who are wanting you to reject those things are definitely of the world, right? And Christ said that they would come, that they would be here, and that they would reject him in us for all time. Do those people have what's in your best interest? Or does God have what's in your best interest? If you don't know how to answer that, I'll answer for you. Hands down, God knows what's in your best interest, even at times when we don't know what's in our best interest. So sometimes that rejection can be God closing a door, or it can be God saying, this relationship needs to be done. You need to end this. I know this sucks and it hurts, but you're being rejected from this person. One of the hardest things that I think happens is because of our struggle with attention and our struggle with executive function is we want to pick apart the situation, but we can also kind of make ourselves stuck, and we can give ourselves an identity crisis if we are constantly worrying about, how rejection happened in one scenario and carrying that change that we feel we need to make from that scenario over to every other scenario. So I'm not talking in that instance about boundaries. Boundaries are healthy. For me, talking about, okay, what can I learn from this? I need to set a better scope of work, those types of things. But I'm not saying, okay, well, maybe the next time I get a client that it doesn't seem to be going that well with her, maybe I'll ask her to go have a cup of coffee and I will just tell her that I like everything about her, right? Now, I think we don't actually think about this happening, but we tend to carry it with us, right? So like in my first marriage, it was very violent and it was very conflict oriented. Everything was involved around a conflict. We didn't go more than a week or two, more than a couple days without having some sort of argument. And in that scenario, the argument was always about something that felt small to me, but for some reason was very large to my ex-husband. And in those scenarios, you tend to tell yourself, okay, well, I want to make him happy, right? Well, here's the thing. It's not my job to make everyone happy, just like it's not everybody's job to like me and to accept me. It's not. My job is to do everything I can to the best of my own ability and to continue to learn forever how to continue to get better in love and kindness and acceptance and more like Christ in everything I do, whether that's my business, whether that's my podcast, whether that's my writing, whether that's me as a wife, me as a mother, me as a friend, me as a contractor. That is what matters. So when I pick it apart, I'm really just looking for, did I do something against this person? Did I do something that directly caused them an issue in their business? Or was it just a matter of we're in two different places? So when you feel that rejection feeling and you start to ask yourself, what did I do? What can I do right to make this person happier with me? Sometimes that's not the answer. Sometimes the answer is that person needs to figure out a way to make themselves happy without you needing to conform to everything that they need. So you have to caution yourself, because rejection sensitivity dysphoria can trap us into constantly feeling like we need to take on the weight of somebody else's rejection and we need to change and we need to morph ourselves into the person that they want us to be, whether that is an employee or whether that's, in my instance, in my past, was as a wife. And I kept thinking, well, maybe if I just do these small things that he keeps asking of me, he'll be satisfied with me. But ultimately, when it comes down to toxic rejection, where somebody is constantly rejecting you over and over again, there was nothing I could have done that would have satisfied him. So how that played out in my client scenario was I recognized that I wasn't going to be able to satisfy her and make her happy in our client contractor relationship. I wasn't. So instead of me doing what I did, which is err on the side of people pleasing and bend over backwards and burn myself out and do everything I can to try to make her happy, I instead will preemptively from here on out set up boundaries with each one of my clients to say, this is where my scope of work ends and where yours begins. And these are the hours that I work. And these are the hours that I don't work. And if I can't get your work done within this time period, I cannot work overtime without added compensation. Now that's as a business perspective, but you can take all of that to your personal perspective. The other thing I will tell you is I think that medication and therapy and management of any kind really, really, really helps when it comes to rejection. Because you need a sounding board, you need accountability, and you need somebody to be there and say, I don't think that rejection is as bad as you think it is. I think it's probably a blessing in disguise. Or, let's look at it. What role did you play? What role did they play? Again, like I said, as an ADHD woman, we spent so much of our lives second guessing. What am I forgetting? Am I forgetting something? Am I doing everything I'm supposed to be doing? Because we were always running on that hamster wheel, feeling like we're never really accomplishing anything because we're not super good at sequencing. So if we do certain tasks, we don't always remember that we did those tasks. And then even when we did complete those tasks, we don't really always remember what the end result is of doing those tasks. We don't see the whole thing. We do each task by itself, like you're looking at every task with binoculars. And all you see is the task in front of you. You get that done, and then you move on to the next one. But you don't realize that each task that you are partaking in, whether that's within your relationship, whether that's within your employment or your business or anything along those lines, they all sequence together to end up with some sort of result, right? But we don't recognize that pattern. And because of that, we're constantly stuck in this habitual thought of, I'm forgetting something, I'm not doing enough. Why am I not doing enough? I should be doing more. And so when rejection comes, we automatically go, oh, they're right. They're right about all of the worst fears that I have about myself. And I'm just not good enough. And that's just not true. You know it. I know it. God knows it. And you don't have to feel that anymore. Sit with those feelings. Think about the rejection. Ask yourself what you can learn from it. Feel it for a minute, but let's not live there. Because living there is miserable. And you don't want to lose yourself to gain somebody that already rejected you. It's not worth it. Take it from me. I truly felt like I lost myself after my first marriage. And I had to go through a period of finding myself again, which was not fun, to lose myself to Christ. And it was amazing and wonderful. But at the same time, of course, I still kick myself and go, man, I wish I would have got it together sooner. So trust me, God knows exactly who you are. He knows what's best for you. And if he's closing a door, trust him. Trust him. I'll talk to you guys soon. I hope you have a great week. Bye.